Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. I think we have a trend going into 2026 on data privacy, data security. Obviously, they kind of all represent similarly the same goals for our MSPs. This week, I'm fortunate to have Andy Sambandam. Did I say that right?
Got it. Yes.
Awesome. With Clarip, recently featured in Forbes. Your company, you've been around for about 9-10 years, and your focus has been largely on understanding how companies are consuming data from a privacy standpoint, correct?
Yes, that's right. So we're a data privacy company, and we help large companies, understand privacy laws, comply with privacy laws, and understand and improve their privacy and security posture.
And I would assume that you guys work just, global data privacy. So and I'll just start with this because I think it's really interesting. In the US, particularly, we're substantially behind with regards to data privacy laws. We have California, Massachusetts. There's a couple other states that have really solid privacy laws, have been around for quite a while. But for the most part, I actually was looking at this the other day by state, probably close to 70%, 60% of the states in the US really don't have very deep privacy laws. They might have something on the books. It's a bit vague. They're kind of focused on more of the PII, but they don't really get into specifics like you see with CCPA or some of the others that are out there. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but GDPR, largely in the European Union, has sort of led with a more intentional, data privacy law than probably anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Chris. So, since 2018, right? So GDPR, has led the way, and privacy is a little bit more mature and evolved in the European Union than what we have here. Obviously, post GDPR, the trend started here in the United States. So first, California passed a privacy law, that's the CCPA, which is widely known. And then additional states, like you mentioned, Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, Massachusetts, and a few other states also passed their privacy laws, Virginia. But there's still a good portion. I think we have about 21 to 23 states with their own privacy
about
laws.
Third to a half, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the rest don't. I think some of the privacy laws that were passed, I think something like Kentucky or Indiana, they went into effect effective January 1, 2026, which is basically
right now.
Weeks ago. Yeah, right now.
Yeah.
But there is still a huge number of states that haven't passed their privacy laws yet. But also, if you think about it, absent a federal level privacy regulation, this is a patchwork of laws. There are lots of commonalities between the 20 plus states that passed the privacy laws, but there's also differences and nuances that's actually making it a little bit more challenging for larger organizations to comply with each of these laws.
Well, that's a good place to just kind of make a note. What's interesting is when we think about privacy laws in general, it's like what constitutes protecting of said data, right? And you mentioned a couple of states. I'm in Iowa. Iowa, the number of key variables that they look at as potentially PII is there's like 13 or 15 different variables that they consider to be part of my identity. And I think if any more than 2 are being used, it immediately is classified as PII. Other states don't have that many variables that they're looking at, which may contribute to that, correct? Like, I mean, you mentioned IP address. Wow, can you imagine having that conversation 10 years ago when most people did not have static IP addresses?
Yeah. Now pretty much everybody gets a static IP address, and IP address is a PII, right? So in certain states, in most states, it is PII under GDPR as well. So what has happened after the privacy laws is, people have certain rights. You could be a resident of Virginia or California or Colorado or any of these states, and you can go to a company, let's say Walmart, and then say, hey, my name is Chris, what data you have on me, or delete my data. or do not sell my or share my data with anybody else. When you say this, now Walmart has an obligation to fulfill your request within a certain number of days. And if they don't, then you could actually go and file a complaint with the AG's office or even sue them in certain cases. So I think for companies, understanding what data they have, and I guess IP address is a common thing, right? It just gets collected automatically, right? So you could have a website, your web server collects it automatically, and all the third-party vendors you may have in your ecosystem, in your apps, on your websites, if you're integrating their APIs and putting their tags, they also collect the IP address. So you are now actually sharing IP address to some third party, in some cases without consent, and that becomes problematic for you as an organization.
Yeah, so having traveled internationally recently, it's been interesting. As soon as you go overseas, leave the United States, every website you go to, every app you try and launch, anything that's consuming anything third party, you're immediately prompted with, accept the cookies, right? Or reject. In the States, it's far less common to have that alert happen where it's wanting you to make a decision about those said cookies. And now it is changing. I have noticed that as of late, it is becoming more common to see that. But one of the things, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is, you go out there and look, because most websites are required both at the state and federal level to have some sort of privacy policy on their website, probably collect information, at least at that level, not getting into what Walmart may or may not do, or fill in the blank company on data that they're doing with later after they've gotten some information from you or on the phone. But I was shocked at how many websites, when I would go look at the privacy policy, there wasn't enough information to help me understand their intentions around why they're collecting my information. So they gave some vague ambiguity around in order to give me the best experience on the website, which doesn't tell me a whole lot, right? And then the second one that I found really interesting was, in a lot of cases, if I went on their website and looked elsewhere, I could find another page that talked about how they handled their security. And the security page and the privacy page would have done so much better if it would have been kind of combined to help me understand how they protect data and what their intentionality is behind using my data, right? So I was just curious, going from that point to the goals behind why Clarip exists and what you're seeing. You've been doing this for a while. What does this shift look like, and why should businesses in general be taking notice of this? Because it's not like every day we're seeing someone get hit with, oh yeah, your privacy, we're collecting data. We see it with the big players, and really the big players only.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So I think I'll almost take a step back to sort of paint the picture, right? So if you think about the example you gave, you have a privacy policy, but the thing is, privacy policy is mostly written by attorneys, right? So attorneys are not necessarily experts in technology. They don't know exactly what's going on in the weeds in an organization. So they're asking some questions to maybe some key stakeholders, and then they're crafting their policy, which is pretty standard based on a template. And but the reality is, what's happening on a site or on a mobile app could be very different than what's actually stated in the privacy policy. I've seen cases where privacy policy was written, 24 months ago, or last updated 36 months ago, and now technology has evolved. New vendors have been injected in your ecosystem, and different things were happening. So it's super important to really sort of merge that the gap, right, the bridge between what's actually happening versus what you stated you think you're collecting. And then also the security aspect, and if you look at these privacy laws like California or other states, there's also security requirements, right? So there's reasonable security requirements. It's not just about privacy. That's also there. The data you're collecting early on, right, many years ago, 10, 15 years ago, the mentality was, so let's collect as much data as we can monetize it later on, right? So this idea of hoarding as much data was prevalent back then. But now it's a liability, right? So you want to make sure that you start with maybe a concept of privacy by design, which is really something that came from the GDPR world, which is under Article 25. So data minimization is a concept, as well as purpose limitation. So you don't want to be collecting too much data that you're not going to be using, right? So that's when consent becomes super important, right? You need to get consent for the purpose in which you're going to use it for. So showing a cookie banner is one thing, on the bottom saying accept all or deny all. But the nuance there is, we call this, opt-in cookie banner or opt-out cookie banner, right? So in some cases, when it's an opt-out cookie banner, the user can opt out. If they don't opt out, if they don't do a action, then tracking is going to be happening quietly behind the scenes. In the world of an opt-in cookie banner, if the user has to explicitly opt in, otherwise the businesses are not allowed to track them. So some states or some jurisdictions, especially under GDPR, force you to have an opt-in cookie banner. So understanding that nuance is one thing, but then to make things more complicated or more worse, it's not just the cookies that's tracking, right? So you have additional types of technologies that can track a user behavior. So that involves, beacons and trackers and pixels and API calls and JSONs and JavaScripts. So there are so many things that can be embedded on a site or a mobile app using certain SDKs. You could be tracking a whole bunch of things, including PII, which is IP address, and et cetera, and not have consent. You think you put a cookie banner and you're safe, you're actually compliant to the law. That could be far from the truth, because there are other technology that's actually still tracking and you haven't gotten consent for that.
Sure. So I have a question that's come up, and you're thinking about different things here in privacy laws and how we protect the consumer, but obviously it also creates an opportunity to protect the business too, right? Negligence and ignorance are not, business success goals. And I was thinking about, I guess we're going on about 1.5 years since the FTC safeguards went into effect, and it had a huge impact on the auto industry, where you have two worlds colliding, right? You have the banking space of, applying to get a loan, and you have the automotive space that's in the business of selling cars. Because they allow the loan application to be operated or done through the dealership, you're seeing two things happen. And I have yet to see very many places where it's like, oh, by the way, our automotive dealership, we are not keeping this information. We are just helping you submit to, kind of like what you would see in more of the, when I go to an ATM machine, in a lot of cases, the ATM is, maybe it's attached to the bank, but the bank isn't looking at all of my transaction history on my card. That's a third party process, not the bank's process, right? I'm just curious, like, is this kind of that, seeing two worlds that have two different intentional goals, right? The automotive doesn't care about my credit, but they do care about selling me cars. So there's a lot of information that just got passed through their processing that they got back from the bank that they're looking at before they have a conversation with me about how I qualified for that loan and what else they want to sell me.
Yeah, exactly, right. So it's sometimes the same thing happens in healthcare industry as well, right? It's the propensity to pay, right? So they're looking at your credit history, a lot of information coming back from the banks, and then they're seeing, okay, I could actually sell him a higher package car, or Chris is tend to buy additional warranty or extended warranty in the previous purchases, so we could actually sell him a $4,000 extended warranty, right? So there are always this motive for upsell, but the risk there for dealerships is actually now you are in possession of this data, and you need to have a methodology or at least a strategy to decide, okay, do you really want to keep it and hold the liability, and or do you want to delete it the post sale? So that's something you want to make sure that you have a proper data retention policy. But also, since you brought up dealerships, there's also one more thing you got to think about. Today every car that's manufactured, whether it's coming out of Germany or coming out of Detroit or any place, it's basically a connected car, right? So you have software that's driving the car. You go sit in any car, your phone, Apple CarPlay or Android Auto or whatnot, or even just Bluetooth, it gets synced up to your dashboard on your car.
Yeah.
And all of your contacts, even messages, everything, even pictures that you have of the contacts gets moved to the car. So when you go sell the car back to a dealership or trade in, the dealership is not technically sophisticated enough to actually go remove that or wipe it out properly. In some cases, things get sold to another person. Now, at this point, the dealership could be held liable because you just took somebody else's, personal information, gave it to somebody else.
It's funny you say that. I just bought a used car, and it had 4 of the 5 slots for phone syncing were full.
There you go.
They're not anymore, but like I was just thinking about what you said. I'm like, I had a database of 5 different devices that probably, when combined, are maybe there's some overlap if it was someone's family, but there's a good chance that that database alone is worth its weight in gold for those that want to sell via text messaging or solicitation through through cellular would be great. A
No,
great database to get your hands on.
yeah, right. That's imagine for a threat actor or a bad actor, if that person gets his hand, he could use, it could be a ransomware situation, right? He could actually go back to the same family member, look at their text messages and say, hey, if you don't, blackmail that person and say, if you don't
Yeah.
do this, I'm
Oof.
going to do that. Or post that online, or threaten to post that online, it could be, serious consequences.
Yeah, and you said it, the car is always connected, so it's not a question of whether or not we've even loading stuff onto that database in the car. If it's a relatively new car, we don't know if that database is being synced back to the mothership.
Oh, yeah, in many cases, right? So a couple of years ago when
Yeah,
I got a car, it is a connected car, but the thing is, by default, the dealerships are telling you, oh, download the app to start the car, or you can locate the car where the car is. And by the way, we are going to give you a free, connectivity to the 5G or 4G LTE for 6 months, and
sure.
AT&T is already pre-built in. So your driving patterns and what you're doing and how fast you're driving, all of this is actually sent back to the mothership. So you have
Yeah.
to go deep into the settings to actually turn these things off. Otherwise, it's just going there by default. The average Joe doesn't know to do this, right? So that's when it becomes problematic.
You're really making me scared. I only want cars that were built 10 plus years ago, right?
Yeah,
And even
exactly. And then
still,
turn these things off. Yeah.
yeah, wait, OnStar's still a thing, right?
Yeah,
Oh
you used to
man,
press that little button up there. Now it's all
that's
touch
right.
screens, and even the
Concierge and everything.
yeah. Well, I don't know how you feel about this. Even the climate controls are in the touch screen now, and I would rather prefer to turn the heat on or off, or blow the AC
It was
on
a
or off
dial.
with a little dial. All the others are okay, but most cars are completely going software driven.
Well, they were saying the other day that there's actually a trend where a lot of the car companies are making a shift back to more of the tactile controls because of the distractions that the touchscreen creates.
Yes,
That I can't blindly change the heat in my car if it's touchscreen, right? I have to look at the screen, but I can
exactly,
change the heat of my car if I am in the ballpark of where the knob is. I can feel for it.
exactly. Yeah.
So going back to what our audience, largely ITSPs, MSPs, from a protecting from a data privacy standpoint, what does that look like? How should they kind of approach the going forward? We know this has always been on most of their radar. We're starting to see things where they're being intentional about their own information that they collect, but how can they both protect themselves and their clients when you consider that they're providing services in many cases to at least 30 to 50 or more companies, and then you count up all of those employees or those users of those services to ensure that we see a better adoption of data privacy without it having to be punitive.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? So, I would probably break it down to 3 or 4 different areas that they should focus on. I would probably start with the data mapping, just to understand what data you have or what data your customers are
Sure.
having is super important. I mean, you cannot imagine the number of times I talk to a CIO or a CISO. They know at a high level, oh yeah, we're using Azure or AWS or Salesforce, but they don't know all the little, applications and stuff that's, being used within the organization. And also, we're using our technology. We ran scans in a pretty large insurance carrier, and after the data mapping scans, we found out there was a database of social security numbers, unencrypted, sitting in a developer's laptop. And think about this, right?
Jeez.
Oftentimes, developers and testers, they just take a production database, they duplicate it, and then
Yep.
they leave it, they forget to delete it. And this is actually not only a privacy issue, but this is PCI DSS violation, right? So from
Yep.
a security point of view. So and then they were able to quickly go in and change that. So I think understanding what data you have, just from a good data governance standpoint, it's important to know. It could be structured data, it could be unstructured data, but understanding where PII is, where sensitive data is within your entire enterprise ecosystem, what's on cloud, what's on prem, and also changing that, like tracking that. Like imagine back in the day, I don't know, 9 years ago, 8 years ago, people used to, even still many, companies in the space, they send out assessments. They send out questionnaires to different stakeholders in a company and ask them, hey, do you have PII, blah, 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 or what kind of data, how many database you have and whatnot. But the thing is, data is constantly changing. The schema is changing. The number of records the volume of records is changing. So you want some sort of modern technology like the ones that we, offer to our customers to scan automatically and identify what's there in your ecosystem. That's the first thing I would start with. The second thing I would probably point out from a guidance point of view is transparency, right? You definitely want to be transparent with your customers, whether it's your clients or their clients and end users, in terms of what you're doing, what data are you collecting, how are you using it, and who are you sharing that with, right? Those three basic areas is super important. Don't try to hide behind a lengthy, legalese or privacy notice, but rather be transparent and show them this is what we're collecting, this is why we're collecting, and this is how we're using it. That is always better. Transparency, is good business. It makes business sense for both parties. It has to be a win-win situation. And one other thing I would say is consent, right? Make sure you have consent for what you are going to be doing. Be very specific on the consent you're getting, and do purpose limitation. Don't have secondary uses. If you get consent to send email marketing, don't use the phone number and start sending text messages. You could be violating, TCPA guidelines, and FTC will come knocking on your door. So really make sure that you are getting consent for the purpose in which you're going to be using the data for, and limit that, and also have some, good data retention policies and whatnot. So those are some of the basic things you can start with, whether it's your client's data or your client's customers' data, because you will be, as an MSP, you will be coming in contact with all of the data.
It's so overwhelming. I'm so glad I don't have an MSP anymore, but it's kind of, you've hit it a few times that really stands out. So at GTIA, we have a program for MSPs that's called the Cybersecurity Trust Mark. Control 3 is data protection. You see this in CIS Top 18. You see this in other places. And one of the things that's so a wake-up call, I think, is that data flow. Where's it going? How is it being stored? Who has access to it? What are we accepting? I think that was one of the things that we saw early on with HIPAA compliance. I remember several cloud vendors, and I don't need to name them because most of them were doing this. They had a disclaimer when you went to create an account that said that you would not upload EPHI. It basically said, check this box to create an account, acknowledging that you will not upload this type of data. And I think that's one of the challenges that we all have, is that we don't have the ability to dictate at a perfect level to say, we can say don't do it, but we can't always prevent that data from getting delivered to us, whether it's through email or even file sharing, where it's like you now have something that's been given to you that you didn't need access to, you didn't want access to it, and it's now sitting on your machine. You had talked about this earlier about some of the things that your tools do, and I realize that there are other vendor companies out there doing this. I just don't know that there's a lot that talk about data privacy as their go-to-market strategy, which I think is super interesting, and I think it's really valuable, if not using your company, that our audience is thinking about how are we addressing data privacy. And we call it out as like one safeguard or a couple safeguards inside the trust mark. But what's really crazy is data flow is super hard, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, because one of the things I've seen is, an MSP will sit down and start doing data categorization, and they're on like category number 12, and you're like, I don't think you need 12 categories. No one's going to remember, after you get past 3 or 4. Keep it high level, keep it generic. So, sensitive, public, confidential, those are probably 3. You probably don't even necessarily need any more than that. What are you seeing with regards to how, when someone leverages your tools, that they have that, oh my goodness, I can't believe we were doing that?
Yeah, it's a great question. You hit it spot on, Chris. So I'll start with this concept of data flows, right? So we developed this technology called Data Flow Analyzer early on, and many of our large Fortune 100 clients are using this technology to understand the data flows. And you cannot imagine when we run a scan, the number of CISOs or CIOs, when they look at this, or chief privacy officers, it's just like the shock in many cases. They'll know, oh, I know these 5 vendors or these
Sure.
systems that we know we have, relationship with, but who is this, 20 other things that I never heard of them? How did they come into our ecosystem? Like it's a big, eye-opening moment, because everybody has blind spots, especially in the
Sure.
enterprise, IT ecosystem. And when you think about data flows, I'll give a couple of examples, right? So, imagine you are going to, a typical, purchasing process as a consumer. You go to the website and you go through a typical checkout process. And sometimes, on the very first page, you're looking at a product, and then you're putting in your email address, or you're adding something to the cart, and then you're going in and adding your email address and shipping address and whatnot. But at some point in this customer journey, you're going to be putting in more sensitive information, such as your credit card number or bank account number, et cetera, right? So the last page, for example, as you're completing the purchase, you really, as a company, you may want to have PayPal or a Visa, MasterCard, Stripe. You want the payment processor there, but you don't want TikTok or a whole bunch of other marketing, vendors on the page, because you're now risking, if they have their JavaScripts on the page, they could be collecting, sensitive information that you just shared without even knowing. In some cases, all it takes is one rogue developer, let's say at Facebook or at one of these companies, to add in a couple of lines of jQuery code, and they could be capturing input fields, and they would drop off after a week. You wouldn't even know that actually occurred, right? So you have that problem at one point. And then now you have all these chatbots, are integrated. So you talked about the example, telling somebody not to upload something, not to upload driver's license or sensitive information, but people are actually interacting with a chatbot. They could be saying a lot of personal, things. They could be dragging and dropping things. And now you are actually sharing that stuff to AI, and you, a company, becomes responsible for that. So you got to have some controls to monitor some of these things and prevent this from happening. And understanding the data flows within your organization is actually super important. And now there is technology, including ours, that's scanning and showing you the data flows. And that's one of the reasons why we're very successful over the last decade or so.
So I have a question. You're talking about that gap that they saw of the additional applications or data destinations that they weren't planning on. Is that tied to like shadow IT, or is it more of a departments and even involving IT, they're making decisions to purchase and implement tools that's not making it all the way to leadership for buy-in, it's just being done?
It's probably both of that. In some cases, it's shadow IT, right? But in some cases, imagine a marketing department, their whole goal or purpose is to, get more people to sign up for things, or trying to market more and, increase the sales.
Sure.
They're not really thinking security. They're not thinking privacy at all. They think, oh, it's not my issue. It's the issue of the chief compliance officer or chief privacy officer. And they're just onboarding or allowing different third-party vendors. In some cases, the vendors are saying, oh, Joe, just go, add a single line of code, add this tag, or add this JavaScript, and you're good. And they're not thinking, if that JavaScript is in turn using an open source tool somebody downloaded from a GitHub, and that's outdated. I don't know. 3 years ago is when it was last updated. And now you
Man in the middle.
Security vulnerability there, and still data is flowing downstream there. We have seen when we run the scans, right? We have seen in some cases it's not just fourth, fifth party that's piggybacking. We have seen 7, 8, 9 levels deep, and data is flowing to those vendors, and nobody has a clue.
That's mind-boggling. So we could probably do a whole episode just on that, but I have one sort of significant final question. My whole world for most of my career has largely been security space, where when we start talking about privacy, I start shifting, and I probably start looking out the window, my eyes glaze over. But I start thinking about things like, if I was using healthcare as an example, you often had a privacy officer, to your point, and a security officer. In the mid-market enterprise space, Fortune 100, you definitely see the separation between those two worlds. I guess I'm looking for your suggestion or thoughts around, we're largely dealing with more of the SMB space, less than 100 employees. They might be serving clients that are bigger than that, but it's easy to get behind security officer, right? Protecting data. I don't care what kind of data it is. We're just going to secure it and lock it down. That is a different world from being a privacy officer. How do you help them sort of see the forest through the trees and recognize that while this is a critical part of what they need to be doing, it doesn't have to be daunting or overwhelming?
Yeah, I think one of the things you want to understand in the world of security as a security officer is, every breach, right, that you have, every security breach you have is actually a privacy breach. You get in trouble
Right.
with the law, you're paying fines or all these things because you know, broke the privacy of some individual or some customer. That's the problem, right? So
Yeah.
understanding the whole concept around security is actually to protect privacy, a privacy of
Right.
privacy of your customers' data, right? So that's a philosophical thing or a holistic view you have to start with, and then you also need to understand now people have rights, right? People have privacy rights. They can go
Yeah.
exercise their rights. They're trying to exercise their right. They're saying opt-outs. They're saying do not sell or share my data. They're saying delete my data or access data.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, because of these rights, now you have to be extra cautious on who you are sharing this with, and the party you are sharing that with. Do you actually have consent for that? So those are concepts now you have to actually comprehend and build it into your program. And also having some good training, right, would be good good
Yeah.
idea to have, right? So because technology is evolving fast, privacy laws are changing fast, every day, every month, every year,
Yeah.
and you just want to stay on top of it. And it's hard. That's where you want to partner with somebody that's a expert in privacy to kind of augment your security. So at the end of the day, you're actually going to be improving your overall security posture.
Right. So last question, this is totally unrelated. I asked this now since the latter part of season 5. Doesn't have to be specific to security. It can be fiction or nonfiction. What is a book that you've picked up in the last 12 months that you think our audience should be aware of?
Wow. I think the most recent, I picked up 2 books. I could probably say, so one is the biography of Elon Musk. I
Okay.
didn't know some of the details. I was looking at that. I think it's the same author that did the biography of Steve Jobs, Walter
Yes.
Isaacson. Yeah. So I picked that one up. And then there is another book. I forgot the name of the author. This is something I saw on TV, The Miracles Among Us. So that's
Okay.
nothing to do with fiction, nothing to do with the line of
No
work that I'm
worries.
in. That's more, philosophy and God and whatnot. So that's a book I picked up. I haven't
Nice.
finished either one of them, but I am reading both of them.
I can relate to that. It's funny. I had somebody on recently, and their book choice was the Celestine Prophecy, which
Okay.
is it's a fiction book looking at the world through the idea behind vampires sucking the life out of us, but in from the context of business and work effort. I was like, I'm surprised that's not a nonfiction, but I'll take it.
Yeah, that sounds like a movie ready to be made.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
It's the next among trilogies of the Pandora and the
trilogies.
like.
There you
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Wow. I really appreciate your time. It was great to have you on the show. This is definitely a different view than we typically get. Looking at it through the lens of privacy is something that we should be doing a better job of. And I think you really captured that. At the end of the day, if you're in the IT service provider space or you're, in the business leadership space, both have the obligation at the end of the day to protect the data privacy, regardless of what that data is, regardless of especially when it's not our data. We don't get to make the judgment call of the value of that data. We can only do the best we can at protecting it if it's been entrusted to us.
Exactly. I think security, and you said it beautifully, and I think security and privacy is sort of, it's a long-term marriage, right? Or a permanent marriage, made in heaven. So
That's right.
that's how I like to think about it.
Well, for those of you listening, this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks and have a great week.
Thanks for having me.